This video will discuss Chapter 5.2, Solving Inequalities by Multiplication and Division. So this is very similar to what we did in the last lesson. The biggest difference here now is that instead of adding or subtracting, we're going to use multiplication and division. So again, this is going to give us a range of numbers. So this side is less than or equal to this side. And so in order to solve this, what I need to do is take the number that is in front of the x, and I could divide it to both sides. It would be one way to look at it. Another way to look at it would be to take this side and flip this fraction and multiply by the inverse, which is probably the more logical way for many of you to see this. Okay, though keep in mind the other way works. And so then 8 times 1/8 is 1, so these would cancel out, and I'm left with x is less than or equal to negative 16. And so like we talked about in the last lesson, remember that we need to write this in proper notation. And so this is for all values of x. X is less than or equal to negative 16. And if I'm going to put this on a number line, the numbers I need to worry about are negative 16 and 0. Right? Keep in mind negative 16 is to the left of 0. And then I'm looking, this can equal 16, right? Because that's what this is telling me. So I'm looking for numbers that are less than or equal to negative 16. So less than negative 16 would be negative 17, negative 18, negative 19. So this should be going this direction. And then remember the arrow tells me that it goes on forever. Okay, and so one reason why we have the 0, so I now know that positive numbers will not work in this particular problem. Right? So that's one way, or one example that you're going to see. Now I want to talk about, this is where a lot of people start to get confused, is what happens when we have to start flipping the sign. So you flip this sign, this inequality sign, when you multiply or divide by a negative number. So I want to come back to this problem for just a second. I want you to notice that I multiplied by 8. And even though this number is negative, I did not flip the sign because I multiplied by the number 8, and 8 is a positive number. Now in this problem, I'm going to end up taking the number in front of the t, and I'm going to divide both sides by that number, and that number is negative 3. And so I would tell you, for the advice I give many people is to deal with the sign first, and since I'm dividing by negative 3, I'm going to end up flipping this sign. Sign will change directions on me. These cancel out, and now I've got a t on this side. 9 divided by negative 3 is negative 3. Now the key thing to understand is the reason we are flipping the sign is not because of this negative 3. The reason we're flipping the sign is because we divided by this negative 3. Okay, same thing, I'll come back to that in just one second. Same idea here. We did not flip the sign not because of this number, because this is a negative number. We did not flip the sign because this is a positive number. And when we multiplied by a positive number, the sign stays the same. Okay, same idea here. So we did flip the sign. So now this is, if I'm going to write this in function or in proper notation, this is going to be for all values of t, t is less than negative 3. Now what I would tell you is you want to start to think about checking your answers. Right? So if I think of numbers that are less than negative 3, negative 4, negative 5, negative 6. So let's take negative 5. Or even, let's go even, what might be easier for some people in their head is negative 10. Right? Negative 10 is less than negative 3. If I take negative 10 and I substitute it in here, negative 3 times negative 10 is positive 30. 30 is greater than 9. This statement is true, which means that it's a good thing that I flipped the sign. And if you go the other direction, like let's pretend I forgot to flip the sign.
Jasmine Addy, if you're in the building, please report to the office. Jasmine Addy.
Had I forgot to flip the sign, I would have ended up with this. So think of numbers that are greater than negative 3. That might be something like 0. Negative 3 times 0 is 0, and 0 is not greater than 9. Right? So that would be a way that I know that I made a mistake. I must have screwed something up, and I want to come back and take a look at that. Right? And then if I'm putting this on a number line, again, this is a negative 3 and a 0. Right? So I'm taking the 0 and I'm taking this number, and those are the numbers that need to go on my number line. And so this is less than negative 3. So this is going to be an open circle on negative 3. And then thinking about numbers that are less than negative 3 would be this direction, negative 4, negative 5, negative 6, and so on. Remember to have the arrow saying this goes on forever. All right, and then finally, what happens when you get a problem like this? So there are multiple ways to solve this. Okay, probably the most efficient way is similar to how we solve the 1/8 problem, is to take this number and to flip it, right? The inverse of this number, so that's, if it's negative 2/5, I'm going to take the inverse of negative 2/5, which is negative 5 halves. I'm going to multiply that, which means on this side you need to multiply times negative 5 halves, right? Make sure that the number is negative. That's really important. Since I'm multiplying by a negative number, and this is where a lot of times people get confused because there's a lot going on in this problem, which is why I might want to deal with this sign first. Since this is a negative number and I am multiplying, I'm going to flip the sign. This becomes positive 10 over positive 10, which is the same as 1, or, these two will cancel each other out. So I'm left with h on this side. And then when I multiply over here, I get negative 50 over 2, which is the same as negative 25. Now, before I go through and I start putting everything into the proper notation and I start graphing, I may want to double check and make sure my answer is okay. So take a number that's greater than negative 25 and we're going to substitute it in here. I would pick easy numbers to multiply. So for example, negative 24 is greater than negative 25. However, that may not be the easiest number to substitute in here. The easier numbers to substitute are numbers often like 1 or 0 if they work. Right? And sometimes they won't work. But in this particular example, 0 is greater than negative 25. And 0 is a really easy number to multiply. So I'm going to take negative 2/5. I'm going to multiply it by 0. I know that anything times 0 equals 0. So that means I would have a 0 on the left side. And that is less than or equal to 10. So I'm hoping that that statement is true. If that statement is true, then this looks like it's possible that I'm right. And this statement is true. So that's one way for me to check to see if I'm getting it right. Right now, if I'm going to write this in proper notation, this is going to be for all values of h. H is greater than or equal to negative 25. Okay, and then if I'm going to graph this, remember the two numbers that I need on there are negative 25 and 0. And since negative 25 is to the left of 0, I would want to put that one first. This says that it's going to be a closed circle on negative 25. I'm looking for numbers that are greater than negative 25. We already determined that 0 was one of them, so I know I'm going this direction. Remember, I want to take this thing past the 0 so that it's obvious that I'm including all positive numbers. I now know that all positive numbers and many negative numbers will work to make this statement true, and that's what this is telling me. All right, that's all we got for you on solving inequalities using multiplication and division. Please remember that you flip the sign when you multiply or divide by a negative number. You have to multiply or divide by a negative number. Anything else will not flip the sign. Right? A lot of times people get very flip happy with the sign once they've learned this new trick. Okay, don't forget to do the problems on the bottom of the page. Thanks for watching the video. See you in class.